My father passed his anxiety to me and the rest of my siblings growing up. I'm trying to not let my children adopt being short-tempered and anxious like many people in my family are. How can I break this generation cycle of anxiety and uneasiness and start healing?
That was Lena, who's a listener of the Mel Robbins podcast. And she had a question about how you recognize anxiety in your parents, especially when people don't talk about it. We're here with Dr. Russell Kennedy. So, Dr. Kennedy, is anxiety genetic?
No. The short answer is no. There are mental illnesses, and I put that in quotation marks, that do seem to have a bit more of a genetic component to it, like schizophrenia and bipolar. But anxiety in and of itself is not genetic. We haven't really isolated anything that would say this is the anxiety gene or anything. What I do think that we have genetically is a tendency to be sensitive. So if you are born sensitive, which everybody I see with anxiety, everybody I've ever consulted with anxiety is a sensitive person. You are a sensitive person
How do you know if you're a sensitive person?
because you have anxiety. No, it's well, because you feel everything. And then the other part about feeling everything as a sensitive person is to survive. It's kind of like autism in a way. To survive, you have to start shutting off your connection because it's just too much.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what happens when you're born sensitive is you learn ways of protecting yourself because your home life doesn't give you the love and attention that you need. Now, you could have good parents who are loving and caring, but just because we are more sensitive, we just need more love. I need more love than my brother. Like
Right.
it's just he is more he's not as sensitive as I am. So your parents could have been fine in a way. But if you are sensitive and you need more love, what you will do is if you don't get it, you will start going to the dark side. Use the force, Luke. So it's important to understand that you need more love and you have to start really giving that to yourself without this becoming like a, pity party, like, oh, everybody has to love each other, hold hands, sing kumbaya. No, it's really something that you learn how to give love, compassion, and attention to yourself.
Well, it's like
And
learning to feed yourself, for crying out loud.
yeah,
Like it's that
it is.
basic. So, how do you break this cycle of anxiety in a family?
Well, first you start breaking the cycle in yourself. So you start realizing that this anxiety I feel is actually this alarm in my body. I'm going to pay attention to that because that is my younger self. And I have many, many people contact me and say, oh, my 15-year-old daughter is so anxious. Can you see her? Can you see her? And it's like, no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fix you first. It's like Caesar Milan, the dog whisperer. He doesn't fix the dog. He fixes the parent. So that's what I work on with people. As I work on the parent, I show the parent how to heal themselves. And then that energy just seems to translate into the children. They start saying, hey, mom, you seem more connected because she's not in that alarm state where she can actually give love and attention to her kids so those kids can get filled up and feel safe. And then that gets handed down from generation to generation. So anxiety isn't sort of genetic, but we are born sensitive, a lot of us. If your mother or father was anxious, which mine was, both my parents actually were quite anxious, you will start seeing that and almost be operantly conditioned to create that anxiety because you feel it in them. So a lot of the kids or people that refer their kids to me are because they are anxious themselves and they feel helpless and powerless to help themselves, let alone help their kids. And then they feel horrible that they've kind of transferred this anxiety gene, quote unquote, to their kids. And it's really about heal yourself first, and then your kids will come along. Your kids will start feeling that. So it's not about the kids, it's about the adults a lot of the time. So for Athena, it would be, okay, how do we find your alarm? How do we find the best time in your life? How do we start changing that pattern, that automatic pattern of negativity and irritability in you first? And then you're more available to your kids. And when you're more available to your kids don't feel so alarmed themselves, and you start healing that whole generational cycle.
Anxiety in a family
Mhm.
is not about the kids, it's about the adults.
Yes.
And you help kids that have anxiety by addressing and healing the anxiety in the adults in that family.
99% of the time, yeah.
So, Dr. Kennedy, what are surprising signs of adult anxiety, particularly for that generation of our parents who never talked about this? Prozac was not even invented yet.
Mm-hmm.
That was not a generation of expressing feelings. So how that was the be seen and not heard generation. It was, shut up and pull up your big girl
I'll give you something to
panties.
cry about.
Yeah, I'll give you something to cry about. No, I'm dead serious because
No, I am too, yeah.
my mom recently said to me, never even occurred to me that I had anxiety. Because maybe I didn't want to feel all that stuff.
Exactly.
Maybe I'm afraid to like go talk to a therapist and open that all up. Like we didn't talk about our feelings. And so it didn't occur to me until recently that, gosh, my mom clearly had a lot of trauma in her childhood and felt invisible. And I've never looked at her and been like, the woman has anxiety. So what are the surprising signs that your parents may be dealing with anxiety? It's just never been talked about in your family.
Alcoholism. That's a big one because, they didn't have the open dialogue that we have now. So it wasn't okay. Mental illness had a tremendous stigma and it still does. It still really does. So there's this resistance to actually admitting you have a problem because that child in you or in them that is loud and painful, it's easier in a way to just keep stuffing that child down because it's not talked about. I don't want to be different than anyone else. So we just accept our nervous system as this is what we're stuck with and this is the way it's going to go. It's been like this for 10 or 15 years. I have so many people that say I've been in therapy for like 5, 10, 15 years. And yeah, I mean, I feel a little bit better, but I'm not really getting there. When you look at therapy costing $150 an hour, it's pretty frustrating for people. It's pretty out of reach for people.
Let me ask you another question because I want to
Yeah.
back you up because I
Yeah,
do
go ahead.
think the surprising symptoms are something we got to
Oh,
talk about.
sure.
So, and I'd love to kind of tick off some
Sure.
because I think this is a big wake up call. I mean, our parents didn't talk about their feelings
Yeah.
because it didn't matter if they did. It wasn't normalized. Nobody was going to do shit about it anyway. And if you were struggling with alcohol, you're a bum. And if you, like my great grandmother, were bipolar, you were institutionalized and given shock treatments. And you would just, quote, go away for a couple weeks. And you were called mean. And so I want to talk about what are the signs that may surprise you that your parents have anxiety and you didn't even know it. So alcoholism was one, but what are the other signs?
Irritability. Parents that are chronically irritable, not connected, just not feeling connected to a parent. My mother is very warm and caring at points and very cold and distant at others. I think that's kind of like the British way in a lot of ways. And so for a child, it's like, hey, sometimes you're rubbing my back and we're feeling connected, and other times you're cold as ice. So in a way, that's almost worse than being consistently one or the other. If she was consistently cold, I would learn how to protect myself from that. If she was consistently warm, I wouldn't need protection in the first place. So for a lot of us kids had emotional dysregulation in our parents that we didn't recognize. So sometimes they'd be nice and connected, and other times they'd be off the deep end. And I think irritability is one way of doing that. Hypervigilance, hyperorganization. These things that show up in our parents because they didn't have a way of expressing it. They didn't know, or they went to therapy. And a lot of people go to therapy and they've been in there for 5 years and they feel terrible because it's like, I've been in therapy. I've been in this, CBT thing, and it's really, it helped me at first. But now I'm just feeling just as bad as I always have. And I've just spent, $40,000 on 10 years of therapy. And it's because, they're not addressing the root cause. And I think hypervigilance shows up. I think irritability, drug abuse. And I'm not talking like, cocaine or whatever. It's, prescription drugs, that kind of stuff that people need to kind of cope. Because like I said, when we go into survival mode, we become very inaccessible, both to ourselves and to other people. And when we're warm and connected to ourselves, we can extend that out to other people. A lot of people are more connected to their pets than they are to their spouse because they see their pet as safe. They don't see their spouse as safe because their spouse reflects some of the crimes of the parent in a way. So it's very interesting to see how anxiety shows up, how childhood trauma shows up in people. And it's usually emotional dysregulation of some kind where they can't connect. And another way of connecting that doesn't look like it is the people pleaser, is the mom who's making cookies for everybody and doing all this stuff and appears so connected because we're very good. Like anxious people are very smart. We know how to present an image that appears connected, but really isn't. But people can feel it. People can feel your authenticity when you're connected.
The point that really struck me there was somebody who is just so loving and kind with an animal and cold with other people.
Yeah, because they didn't trust their parents. Their parents didn't establish that people are safe. My dad didn't establish that he was safe, even though my dad was really kind and loving and playful and great at many, many times. In fact, most of the time that I spent with him was good. But it's like when you get that one bad experience with a dog, it takes 1,000 good experiences to kind of erase it a little bit.
So true.
So it's really important. Again, our brains, we have a fear bias. We are evolutionarily programmed to focus on fear. And another thing that I got from one of your podcasts recently is, and I said this a lot, is whatever you focus on, you get more of. So if you focus on your anxiety, you'll get more anxiety. If you focus on gratitude, you'll get more gratitude. You'll see more Broncos around is basically what it comes down to.
Welcome to part 2 of the Anxiety Toolkit. We have a zero-cost free appointment for you with Dr. Russell Kennedy. He's in the house, everybody. This is a conversation for all of us.